Hello, welcome to another edition of the channel. This one is a rules review on possibly one of my favourite sets of wargame rules, Fireteam Modern by Rory Crabb. It's available on Wargames Vault. I'll put a link obviously on the description of the video. Regulars at the channel know that one of my main wargaming interests, modern platoon level skirmish wargaming. I've tried lots and lots of systems over the years. Not going to mention them all, but things like Force on Force as a good example, Skirmish Sanguine, Ultra Combat, lots and lots of systems. What you tend to find with skirmish systems, they vary in how they activate the troops. As an example, Skirmish Sanguine, when you play Skirmish Sanguine, you're activating an individual soldier and deciding what to do with them. That works great at a relatively low level. So at things like the Fireteam level, section level, works really good system, detailed, works well. The problem that I find with any system that activates pardon me, individual soldiers on activation is that if you've got a platoon of 30 figures attacking a couple of enemy sections, in a turn you're looking at having to activate and decide what to do with possibly 50 figures, and it just slows everything down. So to my mind, for sort of platoon level wargaming, what you need to be doing is activating at the Fireteam level. So as an example, British platoon, you're going to be activating the platoon headquarters and possibly 2 fireteams in each 3 sections. So in a turn, you're going to be activating possibly a total of 7 units at the most. That's more doable. So that's what Fireteam Modern does, which is why I like it. What I'm going to do now is we'll go down to the bench. I'll go through the book and just point out the salient facts. So that's what we'll do now. Right, so this is Fireteam Modern by Rory Crabb. Wargame rules for modern combat operations. What I'm proposing to do is just go through the book, and I'll talk about the salient points. It's a system me and my son Alex have used quite a lot. Ideal for platoon level skirmish, basically. All I've done with this is it's available, as I mentioned initially, on Wargames Vault, and just download it. I bought this sort of loose leaf cover thing off Amazon. It just fits in there, really nicely. So to start off with, basically, this is an updated version. Rory Crabb, the author, appears to update his systems quite a lot, which is good. It starts off with giving you a basic introduction. This system primarily works. What you are doing, you're activating fire teams. So if you've got, for example, a British platoon from the Falklands Wars, an example, you'd have a small platoon headquarters, which would act as a unit, and then you'd have your 3 sections split up into the 2 fire teams, the rifle group and the gun group. So you'd effectively have 7 units that you would be activating and obviously doing things with. As I mentioned earlier, what I found with a lot of skirmish systems, if you're activating individual figures, that works great. However, you can generally only use that, I think, for sort of section level games. If you've got a platoon, you've got upwards of, you could have possibly 30 to 35 figures that you're individually activating. It works, but it's just very, very slow. Whereas with this system at the platoon level, you're activating 6 units, which is much more much more doable. The activation system works with playing cards. So you have a deck of normal cards, obviously red and black for the two sides. You have your activation deck, which you turn over. Obviously, if it's a red card, the red team activates. If it's a black card, the black team activates. And that's basically the way it goes. A thing to mention about the activation system, what you do with that initially, at the start of when you're designing the scenario, each side has what's called a command hand. In these, that can be a number of cards ranging up to about 6, anything from 2 to 6, depending on the quality of the unit, how well organized it is, how good its fire support is, and that as I said, that can vary. So what would initially happen with your standard pack of cards, you deal each side out their command deck. The remaining cards, which has to include the 2 jokers, they form the activation deck, which you turn over. And that's the way it's initially set up. At the start, there's a little mention about forces and classifications. It has got a point system. I'm not a big fan of point system in wargame rules. I prefer to have things scenario driven, but that is available should you want to use it. Basically, the classics for the troops are irregulars, going to tier 1 irregulars, poor conscripts, recruits, regulars, going up to elite. There's a section on battlefield terrain and how that can affect things like movement, and it then goes on to suggested scenarios. This is a little bit of the points thing where you can have conventional scenarios and asymmetric scenarios, and then basically one to the bones of the rule system, which is the sequence of play. So the way it basically works, the game's split into, it's divided obviously into turns. During each turn, the activation deck's turned over, and that says which side activates one of their units, obviously a fire team. At the start of the turn, what you would initially do is you resolve any delayed indirect fire support missions. You'd then resolve repeat indirect fire support missions. You go on to resolving airstrikes, rolling for reserves, the activation phase, which is the bones of the game turn, and then you return the activation cards, and you reshuffle the deck. So what I've just mentioned, command decks, as I've said at the start of the game, each player's you dealt a number of cards relative to the force's command rating. You can't use jokers, they go back into the activation deck. So you've got your cards for your command deck. You obviously keep them hidden from the other player. What you use those cards for is you can interrupt the sequence of activation with them. So, for example, if I was activating on red cards and Alex was activating on black, and we turned the activation card and it was a black 6, I could use one of my command cards to interrupt that if I played a card. It wouldn't matter which colour, but it has to be obviously higher than a 6 to interrupt it, and then that would mean one of my units would activate instead of one of his. So it's a little bit of an interruption thing. You also use them to bring in airstrikes or call for artillery or mortars. So the benefit of it is you haven't got unlimited on-call artillery, even if it's attached. You've got to use one of your command cards, so you've got to be wary of not squandering them, because they're obviously a very useful resource. So as I've said, that activation deck, this is what you're using to turn over and to see which units are activated. Each time the card's drawn, the player whose colour it is obviously activates a team of their choosing, and once both players have activated all their teams in the force, the cards are returned back to the deck, they're shuffled, and obviously the turn ends. Should the jokers, what they're used for, are basically random events. He does give a list of random events, a sort of fairly generic one, in the rules. However, you can just make your own up. Their own, basically, if the joker's drawn, the person who draws it rolls a d6 and consults a table. So you can obviously add or take away whichever you want and make them scenario specific. So to go back then onto the activation phase, when you're activated, each unit has obviously its classification ranging from a regular through poor, conscripts, regulars, elite. They have a number of activation pips. As an example, a regular force, so regular fire team, would have 5 activation pips. If the team was suppressed, it would only have 2, but I'll obviously briefly talk about that later. These activation pips allow you to do certain things, allow you to do your actions. As an example, movement, to do one movement action takes a pip. To get up or get down takes 1 activation pip. Embarking from vehicles is 1. Shooting actions, you can only do that once per turn for infantry. So depending on what you want to do, you've got your firing options. You can fire normally, you can do suppressive fire, you can do concentrated fire, go on to overwatch. And then there's other things, miscellaneous actions, reloading weapons, attempt to spot hidden elements and what have you. Throughout the game, the fire teams, the way the morale system works is the fire teams receive suppression points if they're shot at. These build up, and gradually as they build up, they affect your morale and what you can do. Whenever you're activated, you've always got the option of using your activation pips to remove suppression points. And you can do remove 1 suppression point for 1 activation pip. So you can do that if you want to. Would obviously mean you couldn't do much else, but you've got that option to try and get your fire team sorted out. Officers and leaders, they get extra pips, and they can use them to issue orders to teams within the communication range, which is obviously discussed as well. Movement, infantry normally move 4 inches for 1 activation pip. If you're down, you're moving 3. Handling heavy weapons, obviously you're moving a lot less too. There's rules covering what you can do when you face obstacles. It obviously lessens the distance you can move. Shooting is fairly straightforward. You've got to have an eligible target. There's a system in for hidden teams, and basically if you're an infantry team and you're in cover and you've not carried out any shooting from the cover, you're counted as hidden. So you'd mark that team perhaps with some sort of hidden counter. Hidden teams obviously can only be shot at once they've been spotted. There's rules for spotting, D6 rule, various modifiers, fairly straightforward. There's rules for night operations. So for firing, to briefly describe that, if in a team, so in your fire team, if more than half the figures have got a clear line of sight to target, the whole team's counted having a line of sight and the whole team can fire. If less than half a line of sight, there's only the ones that have line of sight can actually shoot. So it's a fairly straightforward method of doing it. What the way that you're firing is, you're gonna, as a fire team, so if you were firing as a fire team, you're gonna add up what they call the rate of fire score for the weapons. These are listed in a table. Obviously things like GPMGs and light machine guns have got a higher score. Assault rifles and battle rifles, bolt action rifles have got a lesser score. Basically what you end up with, the number is the number of shooting dice you're going to roll. They're all D6s, and basically the score to hit depends on the quality, the classification of the troops. Elites you're going to hit on a 3+, irregulars you're going to hit on a 5+. There's obviously shooting modifiers, whether you're under fire, whether you're carrying out concentrated fire, if you've moved during the current turn, things like that. So you then end up with a number of hits. A nice thing that happens now is that for each hit on the target, the element, the target, receives 1 suppression point for each hit. That's obviously representing the effects of gunfire and what have you on the troops. With the hits, the opposition would then roll saves. So for each hit you've got, you'd roll a d6. Again, depending on the classification, your better quality troops need a lower score to save. So at that end, once you've done that, you're then in a position where to roll for your casualties. Firing wise, that would be normal fire. What you can also do is do concentrated fire. So basically what that is, that's the team concentrating the fire, perhaps through a fire control order from the NCO. And that costs an extra activation pip to do, but the benefit you get, the score required to hit your targets is reduced by 1. So it's going to be easier for you to hit the targets. That's concentrated fire. The other option you've got is suppressive fire, which is basically the team NCO wanting to try and suppress a target, forcing them to keep their heads down so you can do other things, perhaps move. Again, that's an additional pip, but what it basically does, you double the number of shooting dice. So if you were firing with 8 shooting dice, normally, if you do suppressive fire, you're going to be shooting with 16 dice. You don't apply any modifiers. If you hit, you obviously cause suppression. However, you can't cause any casualties when you use suppressive fire. So basically what it's doing, it's giving you a much increased chance to suppress the enemy without causing casualties, which is obviously, although that's a bit of a disadvantage, your big advantage is that you're suppressing them, and you might be in a position where you've suppressed them enough to prevent them from obviously returning fire. Goes into basically cover, there's soft cover, hard cover, how you can use it. Covers using high explosive weapons. Basically, high explosive weapons are, there's less chance that the cover's going to affect it unless it's in the way, and yet really increasing the suppression points you put on the target. It also then goes on to, in the same section, armour, so tanks, AFVs, how to use smoke, close quarter combat, which has been, Rory's tidied it up a little bit from previous versions of the rules. That works quite nicely. And I think it's probably easier, it makes it easier that troops are going to break and avoid close quarter combat. It tends to be quite bloody, but that's probably reasonably accurate. As I mentioned, casualties, once you've got your hits, you're rolling. Basically, it's a D6 table. 2 sides to it. 1 if you've got body armour on, 1 if you haven't got body armour on. And basically the results can be dead, seriously injured, or a minor injury. Minor injuries don't really have a massive impact. Serious injuries, maybe he's laying the figure on its side to indicate that. And at the end of each turn, you roll a d6 for each seriously injured figure. On a roll of 1, the figure dies, obviously removed from play. Dead are obviously dead, so they get removed from play. There's medics involved, where basically you've got the option, if he comes into contact with a serious injury, of preventing them from dying, so the figure not obviously getting that as a morale impact, or possibly even returning them to action. Morale section obviously all works around the suppression system, so all of these suppression points you're getting on your fire teams. Quite cleverly, the way it works is, if the number of suppression points on your team is equal to the number of surviving figures, you're classed as being under fire. And when you're under fire, you've got to add a 1 to the score required to hit when shooting. The other disadvantage as an under fire team, you can't initiate a close assault, so it has a reasonable thing. This is to simulate coming under fire and obviously causing the target to have their head down. Once the number of suppression points is double the number of surviving figures, that team is then classed as being suppressed. Once you're suppressed, what that means is that you revert, when you're activated, to the suppressed amount of activation pips. So if you're regular, where you would get 5 activation pips, when you're suppressed you only get 2. So it means you've got a lot less option when you're suppressed. And then once the number of suppression points on a fire team is 4 times the number of surviving figures, you've basically got to do a morale check. That's a D6. There's various targets you've got to hit depend on the quality, and you're removing 1 success for each seriously injured or dead figure. Checking the number of failures against successes. Your options are best case scenario is the morale check's passed and you'd remove 1d6 suppression points from the team. Team can act as normal for the rest of the turn. If it's equal, so if the amount of failures equal the amount of successes, it still classes a pass. You remove 1d6 suppression points, but you cannot carry out any further actions that turn. And if the morale check's failed, so if the failures are more than the successes, you immediately fall back. Falling back's a system that they use during morale, and basically what you're going to be doing for your team is you're rolling 1d6 and adding the result to 4, and that's the number of inches you've got to move back towards the nearest table edge or cover if you can, and you cannot obviously carry out any further actions. You've then got your fire support thing, which I'll not go into massively, but basically you're using one of your command cards that I mentioned earlier, calling in your fire support. Quite nasty. It can be quite nasty in that your figures fully within the a team fully within the area of the barrage. That takes a number of hits equal to the firing weapons HE rating, depending on obviously what it is, whether it's a mortar, a heavy mortar, a 105. And then there's the results of the hits. The team's partially covered, just received a number of hits equal to half the weapons HE rating, so it's a little bit better. Works quite well, and it's a similar system for air support, full rules for those. You've also got building rules, firing at buildings, protection from a building. That's fairly straightforwardly covered. You've got a little section on civilians, so involving the media. You then go on to field engineering, trenches, bunkers, what you want to do with your specialists, minefields, small section on chemical warfare if you want to use it. This here's the weapon stats. So as you can see here, things like an assault rifle, rate of fire of 2. So when you're firing, you'd be rolling 2 dice with each assault rifle on figure. General purpose machine gun, that's up to 6. Heavy machine gun 6, but you get an additional anti-infantry damage modifier. Then goes on to some very general scenarios and a point system at the back. That's about it. You get quite a lot when you buy this system. Additionally, you get some up-to-date sort of post-2000 army lists, should you want to use them. We've used this system a lot, and to be honest, I can't rate it highly enough. At the moment, I think if you're in the UK on Wargames Vault, it's less than £10 to download it, so it's an absolute no-brainer to get a set. Really good, highly recommend it. If you're at all interested in modern platoon level sort of skirmish wargaming, definitely worth getting a copy. Right, that's Fireteam Modern. As I've already said, it's one of my favourite systems. Can't recommend it highly enough. Really, really good. So if you've enjoyed the review, please like it. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, definitely worth subscribing. You get advance notification when I release videos. At the moment, normally it's averaging about 1 a week. Normally on a Monday, but that sometimes can vary. So if you haven't already subscribed, it's a good thing to do. You can do that from directly from the channel page, or if at the end of this video there's an option to press the subscribe button, which is in the bottom right hand corner, disguised as an Empress 28mm modern British infantryman. So it's definitely worth thinking about that. Next up, what I want to do, which I've been talking to Alex, my son, with for a while, is to do like a video of a game in progress. We're going to be using Fireteam Modern. My initial thoughts are to do the from the Falcons War, the raid on Top Mallow House, which is a relatively small, compact scenario, which I think would probably work quite well for showing you how the rules work, Fireteam Modern. So we'll hopefully get that done for the next video. Going to be a bit of a tester because we've never done one before, so I'll see how it goes, and that's probably what's going to be happening, what's going to be up next. So once again, thanks very much for watching. If you've got any questions at all, ask away, leave them on the, obviously ask questions on the video, and I'll do my absolute best to answer them. So thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next time.